we're very excited about that. And we've taken a very primitive industrial revolution of the 17th and 18th century and turned it into nanotechnology in the 21st century. And we know that we haven't even begun. That the computers that we use today will be looked like Model Ts in a few years. And that this expanding knowledge base just keeps blowing out and blowing out and blowing out. And that learning doesn't stop. That everything we thought was set in cement crumbles like dust. And more knowledge is poured in. They say that 90% of all the scientists that ever lived live now. And that is because we didn't have a lot of scientists living before this great revolution and evolution that occurred in this field. And we are preoccupied by it. We go home and we don't sit outside and meditate. We turn on the TV and the world pours into us. Or we get on the internet. Or we get on YouTube. And we're connected with the world as no other people have ever been connected with the world. I saw a statistic the other day that 63% of the telephones now are wireless telephones, and they're all over the world. And that people that were once cut off in very far distant places now speak to each other over wireless telephones. This interest in the material has never been experienced in the life of humans before. This horizontal emphasis on our life and the vertical emphasis on our life has shrunk. We are quite suspicious of people who delve too deeply into human consciousness, that they may be kind of woo-woo people who wish to communicate with the dead, and for a price will tell you what your relative has to say to you that's been gone for a while. We also know that science has mapped the brain and found the areas that trigger the religious and areas that trigger other things, and that they're constantly finding out more about this strange entity called the brain. Our ideas of floating up to heaven when we die, where is that? Those kind of metaphors don't fit very well anymore. And the temptation and the evidence is we've become kind of flat. But always when this kind of powerful imagery and life come to us, and it has come to us, we also know that the bottom falls out of this vertical dimension in our life. And we begin to wonder what it is that we stand before. If you read Einstein very closely, Einstein claimed to be an agnostic along the lines of the philosopher Spinoza. And he came to say that he didn't understand this, but he knew that something greater than he was involved in all this. And he just did not know how to get his mind around it. Some of you have read Joseph Campbell, and his advice is to follow your bliss. And if you explore with him a little bit about how do you get to your bliss, it's by plunging down into your deeps and learning to listen to what is going on in your life and begin to get a hold of that and interpret that, because that is where meaning comes from. That is so valuable if we are to live and be alive. Wesley had hoped that this movement called Methodist would involve the joining together of knowledge and vital piety. And by vital piety, he didn't mean acting very prim and pretty or going to church every Sunday, etc., etc. But by vital piety, he meant the understanding of faith at the deepest levels of our life, and that they would be joined with knowledge. And there was another side of this that we talked briefly about last week, that there was no such thing as personal religion for Wesley. It was all social. Because when you get down in the deeps of your life, how it's pushed and how we grow is by the sharing of this depth that we have with one another. And that's how it builds up. And when those conversations shut down, when we are unable to plumb those depths in a social way, then we are shut off from our own deeps as well as the deeps of others. The interesting thing about Jesus was that in his time, you had three choices if you were a Jew. One was that you could retreat and kind of look at all of the rules and regulations that you needed to obey and wait for David to come, some Messiah that would roar in with a big army and wipe out the Romans and make you number one. Sound familiar? Or you could just get mad as H and not want to take it anymore and head to the hills and from time to time go cut the throat of a Roman soldier or somebody you didn't like. Although most of the zealots didn't do any of that. They were just mad. That was two. Or third, like Josephus, you could join up. The Romans had it pretty good, and we could just kind of duck our head about a few things and be part of the crowd and get along. Now Jesus came along and looked at these choices, and in the deeps of his life found another choice. Scientists quite often talk about that.